Years of faith. The centennial celebration of the Texas District LCMS. Serban, the story of the Texas District of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod begins here. Located on Farm Road 2239, 7 miles southwest of Giddings in southwestern Lee County, this rural community was once a thriving agricultural area. Today, however, the small farms that dot the landscape are only part-time ventures for most of the residents here. St. Paul Lutheran Church of Serban, one of the historic painted churches renowned in Texas, is considered the mother church of the Missouri Synod in Texas. This congregation was founded by a unique and little-known group of Slavic immigrants, the Wends, who began their journey far from the rugged landscape of Texas.
I'm the 8th pastor in 152 years here. This congregation it's unique in the fact that it's the Texas District congregation, but it was formed in Germany. In 1854, Pastor Johann Killian was called to be the pastor of a group that had organized for the purpose of immigrating to the United States and founding a Wendish colony.
Nobody knows fully where the Wends came from. I mean, they never had a country of their own. They migrated into what is now eastern Germany, somewhere around the 9th century A.D. When they came to Texas, they came across on a sailing ship, which was called the Ben Nevis. That was an interesting journey. Lots of things happened on that journey that were both tragic and inspirational. There were storms and deaths and cholera and all manner of things like that makes one wonder how in the world they ever made it here in one piece. And many of them did, in fact, die across the seas.
Reverend Johann Killian was a stalwart, determined, even rigid figure, a pioneer in every respect. Ironically, his efforts to preserve the Wendish heritage in Texas was often challenged and ultimately short-lived.
1 year after they came to Texas, they came in 1854. 1 year later, 1855, Pastor Killian joined the Missouri Synod. 10 years later, roughly, St. Paul congregation also joined the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. These people spread out, and we find more and more churches, 12, 15, 20, 25. Things are happening.
And so began the first LCMS congregation in Texas. Or was it? Around the same time, Salem Rose Hill founded its congregation in the Houston area.
As we did research for Salem's 150th anniversary, God was so good to us in that we were able to acquire the diary of Salem's very first pastor, Heinrich Braschler. On July 20, 1851, he records that they had their first worship service at Spring Creek, and at that time 2 baptisms were held.
For many years, Serban and Salem shared a friendly rivalry that boasted who was truly the first LCMS church in Texas.
There's been some question about, well, what's the oldest congregation in the district that's affiliated with the Missouri Synod? Good news is there are several congregations that hold that title because it depends on how you look at it. Salem was an older congregation founded a few years before Serban, but it was a part of the Texas Synod. In fact, it was a founding member of the Texas Synod. And just before the Civil War, because it did not have a pastor and the Texas Synod could not provide one, appealed to the Missouri Synod for a pastor and was granted it and joined the Missouri Synod as a result. And so Serban was in the Missouri Synod longer. Salem's an older Lutheran congregation, and there you have the story.
The roots of Lutheran worship in Texas are defined by a history of classic hymns, rich liturgy, and comforting traditions. The sacraments of Holy Baptism and the Lord's Supper remain crucial elements to Lutheran life. At the heart of it all remains the message of grace and the forgiveness of sins through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. But the traditional forms that Lutheran worship began with 100 years ago remain relevant and meaningful today.
Congregation may be seated. We continue with the sermon hymn today.
When my daddy died, and Amy and Eugene were younger, and, when he died, and we went up to Pastor Biar to make the funeral arrangements. And, well, what song do you want? And my sister, Edna, she said, we don't want a lot of songs, and we don't want sad songs. He said, what do you want? I fall asleep in Jesus' arms, or, some of those. No. Well, what do you want? My sister, one of us said, A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. That's a Reformation song, and that's the only song we had. And to me, that's still, it's so triumphant.
To me, it's a connection with all those who have gone before me. We have the communion of saints. All those people who are in heaven now, they sang those songs from the bottom of their hearts. And when I sing those songs, I feel connected with the people around me, and not just with them, but with all those who have gone before and taught me those old songs. This is a copy of Killian's Choralbuch. He wrote down all of the Windisch melodies that the Windisch congregation was using here in Serban when he was a teacher, in teacher training at Addison, Illinois. And then this is what he used when he became teacher here at Serban for over 40 years. The original is in the museum at Serban in the vault to protect it, but we have copies. And on some Sundays, before church, we'll play the Windisch version and then the English version, so the people can still hear the difference between them. I love the Lutheran liturgy because it has such a history behind it. It's not just the Lutheran liturgy. Luther took the Mass and purged it of things that weren't scriptural. And this that we have here every Sunday morning, page 5 and page 15 at Serban, is just such a connection. It's not anything it's not a trend.
The early pioneering years of what was to become the Texas District was often defined by congregations learning to move beyond many of their previously held conceptions and adopt new points of view in order to persevere into the future. The future was the formation of the Southern District, which preceded the Texas District. W. H. Buey, a gifted and talented Texas District pastor, writes in his book, Missouri in Texas, about when the Southern District was organized. There were 13 congregations in Texas at that time. By 1904, this number had nearly doubled, and the vast territory of the state across which these congregations were scattered was becoming a challenge to traverse. Change was on the horizon for the Southern District.
They separated the Texas District out from the Southern District, which then included and still does Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. The reason being they felt that this was too large of a landmass for them to be effective in reaching the unchurched.
After the urgent pleadings of the folks here in Texas, Senate consented, and indeed the Texas District was born.
The birth of the Texas District signaled a new beginning and new opportunities for spiritual outreach, growth, and renewal.
The reason Texas was formed as a district was so that we could reach the fast-growing state that was happening. And we were having people moving into Texas from other parts of the United States, and growth was happening all the time. And so our purpose was, to come into existence, was basically a missional purpose.
23 voting congregations that were present at the first meeting of the Texas District of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which was held in Houston, Texas. It had as its first president A.W. Kramer. When you walk into the district office, you will see on the walls pictures of all the past presidents, starting out with A.W. Kramer and going all the way around to the current district president, Jim Linderman.
The presidents of the Texas District have served a respected and demanding ministry role. In the early years, the role of president was part-time, and the pastors who served did double duty, serving their congregations and the district. In later years, beginning with Reverend Carl Heckman, the presidency became full-time, and the demands of serving congregations throughout the vast state of Texas required more time, energy, and prayer. 15 men of God have served the Texas District over the past 100 years. At the district convention in 2006, the Texas District elected its 16th president. Education has always been a hallmark of the Lutheran Church. This was no less true in Texas. Beginning with 1- and 2-room schoolhouses in the late 1800s, Lutheran education had humble beginnings.
Well, I was born in Lincoln, went to school here, baptized here, confirmed here, and went here for a long time, and went to school here also in the same little 2-room schoolhouse over here.
Pastor Bowie, in his book Missouri of Texas, has a kind of an anecdotal thing about a group of Lutheran families that were being served, I don't remember if it was in the High Plains or Panhandle, but way up that way somewhere, by one of these pastors who was doing this heroic work of traveling from place to place to place to place to place, looking after all kinds of little pockets of Lutherans. And these people complained that if they didn't get a school, they were going to move. Well, they weren't even an organized group, and yet that was the dominant thing on their mind. People cared very significantly that their children were somehow taught in detail, not just to read and to do enough calculations so as not to be taken advantage of, in math and transactions they might get involved in. And, not to know how to farm or how to butcher hogs or whatever. They took care of that at home through a kind of an apprenticeship they learned from Dad and Mom. But to be taught the faith. To be taught the faith.
Do you want us to tell you our memory verse to you? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. John 3:16.
She's good. You was good. You got it. You're good.
Prior to the 1900s, there were congregations in existence that had their schools, because that was just a given. A congregation had a school because it was a part of congregational life. That's a part of the tradition and heritage they brought to this country. As time went on, we had congregations with a lot of congregations with schools. Over a period of time, that changed as people moved out of rural areas, and many of our congregations were rural, Lee County and so on.
Frequently, overwhelmingly frequently, that is to say 80-90% of the cases in those early days, that school was being taught by the pastor. The parents in the congregation knew these people to be called servants in their midst and were in league with them, in cooperation with them, in seeing to it that these kids moved on successfully doing their work. So it was not parent against teacher, it was parent in cahoots with teacher. The parents knew what the teacher wanted, and the teacher knew what the parents wanted, and they worked together to see to it that whatever it was that was supposed to be done by way of homework or attendance or punctuality or behavior or all those kinds of things was done.
Throughout the years, congregations have always responded to the challenges that they faced and maintained their school ministry. But our schools are predominantly in the urban areas. And there, of course, we faced struggles. We had strong schools like in Houston in the various congregations, Bethany and so on, but that has changed considerably as the communities changed. And population in many of our schools became culturally diverse with the ethnic nature of the community. But in some cases where there were drastic changes in community, our schools closed. But then, on the other hand, some of our schools have grown larger and larger and larger, and we have some very fine, large schools. We have schools that have been recognized as blue ribbon schools by the United States government, Department of Education. So the quality of education has continued to be improved, and we have strong schools. And so whatever the challenges were of the day, they have been met. But our schools are predominantly today urban schools and suburban schools, large schools in the suburbs and following population growth, things like that.
Today, Lutheran education has developed into an important and respected institution with a proud history and heritage to drive it forward into the future.
Started way back with Luther. He wanted the fathers to instruct their families in how they should grow up to be Christian people and to rely on the Lord in all aspects of their life. And in our Lutheran schools, that's being done. We see so many different ways where that's lived out. That whole idea of developing Christian leaders is not just sitting in a classroom, but it's doing a service project, or it's doing a can-do project, or it's going to New Orleans, or it's going to Central America or South America. But a service project doesn't have to be just going miles away. A service project, really serving the Lord, is 24/7. And so if we can help our students, our children of all ages, understand that God does have a purpose for their life, and God does desire them first to follow Him, first and foremost to follow Him, and we do that by serving Him. And I think that's just, it's exciting to see our students get fired up about that. We know we work and live with sinners. We are sinners. And we know our students are going to make mistakes, and they are going to do things that they shouldn't do. We have an opportunity at Lutheran schools to help them understand God's forgiveness, but then just as Jesus told people, go and sin no more, to go and live out that life in service to Him.
Because we saw that the challenges for ministry were there, and that God says, touch the lives of people wherever they are, our schools responded to that. And many of our schools are culturally diverse. Hispanic and Afro-American students, I think most of our schools will have. And now with many Asian students and Asian families that are in Texas, we see that population there too.
In the early days, circuit riders, ministers who traveled Texas going from circuit to circuit, to minister to multiple congregations or preaching stations, were the backbone of the Texas District Ministry. Today, as the face of ministry has changed, there are few true circuit riders left. However, the importance of such mission-minded ministry in the Texas District has not changed, as evidenced by the ongoing focus into multicultural ministry.
To tell you the truth, I was afraid of him at that time because he was, I knew him all my life, but I was afraid of him because he was so big and he was so tall and all this. To me, he was so important. He said, say the commandments. And so we said the commandments. And then he said, say we went through the commands, 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course we were 5 that got confirmed. So each one of us had 2 commandments to say. And what does this mean? And we had to say the meaning. And then, I'll never forget, he said, what does God say about all this? And there was quiet, and I started. And I said, this means, and I said, that God is a jealous God. And I went on all through in Spanish, of course. And his mouth fell open. And I'll never forget, I never saw a broader smile and a kinder look and a more loving look from my dad. Because he didn't even know I knew that. I had just learned it on my own.
The number of unchurched Afro-Americans in this community, and there are lots of churches in this community, the number of empty pews in all of the churches here in Acres Homes, the field is ripe. The harvest is plentiful. If that harvest is going to be brought in, we have to be the harvesters to go out there and do the harvesting. And we have to look at the field and see, how do you work this field? I see the Texas District working to making the ministry a viable and effective ministry. I think of the personal attention that Pastor Lindemann gives to the struggles of those ministries, and what he does to try to support that ministry and to be sure that ministry stays there in that community, that the Lutheran Church, with the gospel clear and crystal clear of proclamation of God's grace, that if everybody else leaves, that we're still there making that proclamation at a convocation last fall. And President Lindemann was here when it started, and he was here when it ended, because that showed his interest in the ministry that's going on through that unit, and gave him an opportunity to see firsthand, not just one thing, but to see everything, to see all of the dynamics that went into decision making, to hear the things that were talked about, to hear the people who talk about them, rather than somebody giving him a summary of this is what happened at the event. That's a positive.
Right now, as we speak, we're right at Irving, Texas, and right behind me, as you see behind the fence, is the Islamic Center of Irving. People of Book Lutheran Outreach is a ministry that focuses on reaching out to Muslim people and in the hope to raise leaders among them, to train them in the mission field, to teach them our Lutheran sound doctrine, in order that they also go out and reach out to their own people in their own mother language. One of the challenges that we have when we come to these mosques is that they don't want us to speak the truth about the Quran and about what Islam teaches. 2 weeks ago, I went to the Islamic Center in Arlington. There was an open house, and they invited a dozen of policemen. They had the FBI there, and they had even the mayor of the city. They have the staff, and they were giving them trophies and thanking them for their recognizing them in their work in the city. And all of a sudden, this preacher came and he started teaching about Islam and how Muslim people are great. And when the time came for me to ask the question, I asked him, why is it that you are not portraying Islam as you ought to? Because what you just talked about is not Islam. And he got really offended because I was reading it from the Quran. I was reading him the Surah Quran. One of our roles is to not only spread the gospel, also defend the Christian faith. You noticed the day when we were trying to take the shot for the Islamic Center Irving, I was kind of nervous, and we were trying to do that in a hurry because there were Muslim people coming to worship. It was about 6 o'clock. The reason I was nervous, not because they were going to come and attack me or terrorize me, is because I didn't want them to see the work I do and then they will stop me from coming to church, because I have a lot of friends there. So that's one of the challenges. I cannot reveal my identity to them, because as a Muslim convert, I am an infidel, and my life is in jeopardy, because they will try to look for me and try to eliminate me from reaching out to their own people. The privilege of being a part of the Texas districts and reaching out to Muslims here in Texas is that Texas is ripe with Muslims, and the fields are ripe, and we really need to get out and share the good news with our Muslim neighbors.
Ministry in the Texas district today seeks to be culturally relevant. Contemporary worship services offer new opportunities to explore spiritual ground in the ongoing mission to praise the Savior, while attracting new people who might otherwise not be open to hearing about the saving grace available through Jesus Christ.
I didn't necessarily have in my own mind a certain style of ministry that we had to be. I wanted to be a style of ministry that I thought would relate to people.
It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter how much you do. You cannot out-sin God. For every sin, He's offering you 3 forgivenesses.
As a pastor, many people call me by my first name. They speak to me as they would just anyone else that they know. And the ministry is much the same way. When I look at Jesus and why he came to this earth, it's all about the incarnation, that God is someone that we can't grasp, but he became man for us because we can grasp that, we can understand.
My Savior loves, my Savior lives, my Savior's always there for me. My God was, my God is, my God is always gonna be. My Savior loves.
To me, that's how ministry needs to be. That's how I try to be with the people. I don't try to set myself up as being different from them because I just want to be relatable to them. And I think ministry has to be the same way. The songs that we sing, the messages that we preach, everything that we do has to keep the incarnation in mind, and that is making God real for the people, because that's what Jesus did.
From Light of the World in Fort Worth to Cross Point in Katy, contemporary worship services are assisting in spreading the gospel message and breathing new life into these communities' worship experiences. Just as those early missionary efforts of this district sought to do, reaching the unchurched is the key in this new approach in worship.
Right now we worship on a given Sunday a little under or a little over 1,000 people. We have a progressive rock band. Our worship leader doesn't look like your typical Lutheran worship leader. When you see Frank, he's bald but has a long ponytail out the back. So there is right away a feel that the people leading the worship look like the people we're trying to reach.
And I want to make sure as the worship leader that they have an opportunity to pour themselves into worship, whether they've been a believer for 5 minutes with some new, very accessible praise song, or whether they've been in the faith for 50 years. And we will every Sunday we rework a hymn. Every Sunday we do a new worship song, and then we try to hit both sides of that spectrum every week.
Our style of worship is critical and integral to our ministry design. Because most Christians don't understand how difficult it is for a person who hasn't been in church, for whom that's not part of their weekend routine. They don't realize how difficult it is for a person to go to church. We think they ought to just want to come. And so to get over that hurdle, we really need to make sure that once they literally walk into the facility, all the way, especially through worship, it speaks to their heart, it answers their questions, but it does it in a way that they go, I understand this. And it may not communicate it to me as a Christian, but it definitely communicates to them that these people are like me, they're on the same journey I'm on, they like the things I like, okay? And one of the things that's real critical in doing a church like Cross Point is that you have to look at who you're trying to reach, and you have to say, what values do they have? Okay, that we would say, you know what, we have those values too. But then what values do we have we know they need to have? So obviously our value for Jesus is one they don't have. But they do have a value for spirituality. They have a value for families out in this area. They have some of the same values of education concerns and everything. So we latch onto those values and we say, hey, we're a lot alike. Let us also show you this value that answers a lot of those questions you have. And that's why the worship is key in helping make that message connect with the listener.
And we confess them to you now with confidence that you will forgive us.
Today, the Texas District of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is 367 ministries strong, with 176 elementary and parochial schools, 7 high schools, and 1 university. History, education, missions, worship. These are just a few of the elements that stand out in the Texas District. The Texas District exists today in part due to the willingness of those early pioneering ministries and missionaries who sacrificed and learned the hard lessons of a faith-filled life. As we reflect on our past, we must take a page from our own history and remember the challenges our forefathers faced and the lessons they were willing to prayerfully learn as they paved the way for their future. Now, our past, trusting in a Lord and Savior whose ultimate sacrifice and resurrection provides an everlasting future for all who believe. As the future of the Texas District stands boldly before us, what will the next 100 years offer? What will the Texas District say about our generation in another 100 years?
I think the future of the Lutheran Church in Texas District is very exciting. We are a church with good theology, and we have a handle on what our mission truly is, and that is to be proclaimers of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the unchurched and also to ourselves. And this church is going to go forward here in the Texas District because of its theology and also because of the prior planning that we have in the Texas District, and establish an organization that is very, very effective in supporting the different ministries here in the Texas District that we have generated, and also that have ministries that have been generated by the different congregations. Our people stand ready to support all church workers in their ministry in the classroom and also in the pulpit so that they can be better communicators of the gospel. As the population of Texas grows, and it's growing by leaps and bounds, we are meeting this challenge by adding additional church workers and different ministries that can meet the challenges of our time. Particularly is this evident in our meeting the challenges of the increased population of the Hispanic population. We're doing this by creating a training center in Brownsville that will be operated by Pastor Steve Marfitt to raise up Hispanic church workers to speak specifically to this minority need.
My grandmother died this past spring. She was 103. So I think about the fact that she was 3 years old when the Texas District started. And I kind of think about, are there 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and Michael's a 12-year-old, that are out there now that are going to be around to see the next 100 years and just all the changes in our society, but the opportunities then for God's people to be proclaiming the gospel. We know there's going to be opposition. We know there's going to be challenges, but we also know there's going to be wonderful opportunities by God's power. And so I look at the Centennial as a look back to the past, to what God has done, but then to look to the future. And we don't know what that future holds, but we know God knows, and to be excited about how God's going to use us in the future.
God has demonstrated his presence among us for over 100 years, and that he's blessed our ministry, that he is the head of the church, and that he will continue to guide us in the future.
As we look back upon the birthing of this district, we see that a lot of risks were taken. People dared to do something differently.
Really, it'll be a great celebration of a group of people, all changed from the beginning times, but a group of people that have stayed faithful to the Word, that have stayed faithful in the mission, that are committed today to looking forward and expressing a vision of optimism and growth and proclamation and proclaiming the good news of Christ to many people.
It's not a time to sit back and just rest on the 100 years of the past. It's a time for rededication, a time to renew our efforts in what God's called us to do.
I regularly hear from people who say, we had never had that spirit in other districts as you have in Texas. And I think somehow that spirit makes the difference. We have an attitude that says we can do things in the power of God and by the Spirit of God guiding and directing and empowering us. It also expresses a closeness brother to brother in the congregations of the district, and I hope we never lose that.
I think the Texas District will be a vibrant part of Christendom, part of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod in proclamation. And the centennial is a time to celebrate that and to look at that future and say, the God who has strengthened us in the past will continue to be with us, and by the power of the Holy Spirit, we can be great instruments for reaching the lost, discipling the saved, and caring for people, doing that locally and globally.
I think we need to have eyes that see people as they are, sinners that need salvation, a possible ministry not like what we've had before, but changing to meet the needs of people around us, but never giving up the essence of the Christian faith, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need to hold on to that above all, at all costs, and then work it in so that it is meaningful to people who are not Lutheran, that they come to know this as a central part of their faith too. They become Easter Christians. And in that way, celebrate the goodness of Christ who died for us and came alive again, that we might eternally have life and peace and hope. And that ministry continues until the end of time.
There are going to be good times and bad times, and our Lord's parting words have always been a source of support and strength and comfort to me. Lo, I'm with you always, even unto the end of the world. These words are important certainly to remember when the times are rough, that God has his hands upon our shoulder and he's going forward with us. But it's also that important that we remember this during good times so that we don't take all the credit, but rather we give glory to God for all the blessings that we have.